Welcome to Enterprise Tuesday. My name is Bruno Cotter and I'm the Executive Director here at the Entrepreneurship Centre. I've been asked to remind you that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on YouTube for attendees. As we close this year's series, tonight is the first of 4 events around the role of entrepreneurship in tackling the hugely important topic of climate change. As many of you will be aware, the UK is due to host the 26th UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow later this year. And meanwhile, Cambridge Zero is a significant and ongoing effort by the university to harness its research, innovation and policy expertise to contribute to solutions that address this pressing challenge for all of us. I'm delighted, therefore, to introduce our chair for this evening's discussion, Dr. Chris Coleridge, who I know is deeply passionate about this topic. Chris is a senior faculty in management practice here at the Judge Business School and has taught strategy, innovation, management and entrepreneurship widely over many years since starting out as an entrepreneur himself. He is a board advisor to several startups in the fintech, construction, healthcare and digital sectors, and most recently co-founded Carbon 13, a Cambridge-based talent-first accelerator investing in startups looking to tackle the global issue of CO2e emissions. Thank you, Chris, for joining us and helping to expertly navigate the evening ahead. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Bruno. It's a privilege to kick off this series of Enterprise Tuesday sessions on entrepreneurship and its relation to climate change and the climate emergency that we all face. The title of this evening's session is, Do We Need Disruptive Innovation to Tackle Climate Change? And before introducing my 2 distinguished guests, I'll just unpack a little bit why we thought that was the way to kick off this investigation of entrepreneurship as a tool for humanity to really address the climate emergency. We know that there are certain types of entrepreneurship, types of innovation, classes of innovation that don't emanate easily from corporates. Corporates are gearing up to tackle the net zero challenge around the world, but we know that historically certain types of innovation, and they happen to be types of innovation that we really need to tackle the climate emergency, corporates struggle with. And I'll just list 4 of those. Business model innovation is something which corporates have been known to do, but which often they find very difficult, especially innovation which is disruptive in the sense that it attacks or cannibalizes their existing revenue streams or their existing pools of profit. Historically, whenever major business model innovations have come to light, they've emanated from entrepreneurs and what you might think of as new entrants and attackers, defending the profits that they are currently making is the sort of raison d'etre of many corporates, and so there's a sort of stickiness to their existing ways of doing business. A second type of innovation that corporates find difficult is innovation which is cross-disciplinary. In the same way that profit pools and revenue streams are sticky, mindsets and cultures and decision mindsets are sticky. And corporates tend to gravitate to the types of decisions and the types of approaches that made them great in the first place. They tend to sort of get stuck on those. So cross-disciplinary innovation, where you need to bring in different types of thinking from different sectors, tends again to come from small shops, from entrepreneurs who work out how to hybridize thinking across sectors. We also know that innovation that front runs regulation tends to come from entrepreneurs, that corporates are reluctant to invest seriously in innovating where the regulatory case is not yet clear, whereas entrepreneurs are more likely to say, okay, there's a big opportunity somewhere over there, let's get going on it, and the regulatory picture will either move in our direction or become clearer over time. Finally, innovation that sort of primes and inspires behavior change tends to be the province of entrepreneurs. It's not that corporates never change consumers or customers' behavior. It's just that they don't do it very often. And whereas entrepreneurs tend to be the ones who get in the cracks and figure out what new packages of value are going to be relevant to customers, what new sort of ways of inspiring them to behave differently are relevant. So all of these: business model innovation, cross-disciplinary innovation, regulatory front-running innovation, and behavior change innovation, are highly relevant to the climate change challenge. So with my distinguished guests, who I'll introduce in a moment, I'm looking forward to spending this evening with you, exploring some of the issues around this and looking at how this is emerging across different sectors. And after we've had some time with our guests, we will open up for Q&A. Just to be clear, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box, which you see along the bottom of your Zoom screen, to ask those questions. We use the chat just for comments. But if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we will field them in due course. So it's my great pleasure to welcome to Cambridge Judge Business School and our very long-running lecture series, Enterprise Tuesday, Moshiel Biton, who's the CEO and co-founder of Addionics. Moshiel has a PhD in imaging and modeling of battery materials from Imperial College London, and he has experience developing new methods to image structures specific to battery materials and understanding degradation in both conventional and novel battery cells. He has 21 peer-reviewed publications and has co-authored 3 patents. He's helped produce, assemble, and analyze many cell types and different battery technologies. He's been an active board member of the Israeli Business Club in London for over 3 years. He's been a recipient of 10 different prestigious honors and awards. He's conducted fundamental research into the design, synthesis, and application of 3D metal structures that has paved the way for Addionics formation. He's been active in the battery field for almost 10 years, and prior to that was active in the semiconductor domain. So I'm delighted to have a guest who's going to be able to help us look at issues in energy, in mobility, and of course in compute around semiconductors. So welcome to Cambridge Judge Business School, Moshiel.
Thank you very much. Thank you for this kind introduction. Looking forward.
Thank you. And I'm also equally delighted to welcome Jogchum Brinksma, who's a private investor and the founder of FLOBAS Ventures. Over the past number of years, Jogchum has invested in a broad range of university spin-outs focused on innovative breakthrough technology. He is now seeking climate-oriented tech investments, such as technology contributing to the energy transition. He's invested, for example, in the Cambridge University spin-out Immaterial, which is helping the future hydrogen economy with purification, separation, and storage, and the ability to capture and store CO2 with MOFs. Jogchum supports these companies with capital and advises on their strategic challenges as a non-executive director or advisor. He has a portfolio of 20 investee companies in the UK, the USA, and the Netherlands, and these have collectively come together within FLOBAS Ventures. So welcome to Cambridge Judge Business School, Jogchum.
Thank you for your kind words. Appreciate to be able to contribute to an interesting topic to discuss.
Fantastic, thank you. Moshiel, perhaps you could introduce yourself and tell a little bit of your story relating to innovation in this space.
Sure. So first, thank you, Chris, for this kind introduction, and definitely looking forward for this discussion, an interesting topic. So I am Moshiel, the CEO of co-founder and the co-founder of Addionics. We started a company almost 4 years ago after completing like a PhD and postdoc at Imperial College London, as mentioned. And we've got inspired during my research in some phenomena, and I had an idea why not to start a company. So as a very good like a student or like a colleague, I went to my PhD supervisor and asked them, okay, guys, I got something here. why not to develop and to do something further? And every time that I came to them as a good student, they started like to laugh and to make fun of me. It's not going to work. It's going to break the thermodynamic rules, etc. It's against the physics. And as very passionate student, I really wanted to make a difference and an impact. And with this idea, they said, you know what? Yes, it's going to work. There is a good chance that it's going to work. So this gave me the appetite to start a company. I asked them like it was just a game. You know what? I'm going to fund a company, and you're going to work for that company. You're going to be my co-founder. They laughed again, and today they are working full time in the company. So that was the student revenge. And what we found, that there was a like overlooked solution in the battery domain. We went to all the biggest battery conferences and convention, and the most of the focus in the battery was on the battery chemistry. And we said, okay, there is an overlooked solution, the battery physics. What if we're going to change the architecture of the battery that, believe it or not, didn't change in the last 30 years since the invention of the lithium-ion battery? And in academia, it was well known, but not in the mainstream, that changing the structure will give like and boost the performance. But no one solved the manufacturing to date. And our inspiration was with a novel manufacturing process to produce like novel structure and architecture in a cost-effective way. Because in batteries, what is really important is to be able to make billions or millions of cells a day at competitive cost. This is what actually going to move this industry forward. And we ask ourselves, is the manufacturing process that's going to solve this problem? And then after like doing lots of brain exercise and lots of discussion and debates, we said, okay, we have the manufacturing process, let's move forward. It wasn't easy at the beginning. It was super tough. It's still like very challenging every time that you are fighting, to work with another customer, to have like a proof of concept, to manage to scale up the technology. But in overall, we raised like $8.5 million. Some of the funds are equity, some of them are non-dilutive grants from different governments. We're based in the UK and also in Israel. I moved back to Tel Aviv, where it's like, Israel is the startup nation. So I wanted to benefit from the ecosystem, both from London and Tel Aviv. So we have office and site and lab in London, central London, White City, and also in Tel Aviv, central of Israel. And we are conducting the research. And in such like relatively short time, we already have market traction with working with multinational companies to prove that this change in architecture is going to bring like a boost in the battery performance.
Fantastic, fantastic. So, if I may just follow up on an aspect of your of the story that you've just shared. So, why, you talk about it being challenging to win these new partners over. Why do they choose to work with Addionics instead of a much larger entity, a more established player in the battery space?
Yeah, I think it's always like a tough, it's a fair question. It's always like difficult to show why you are different and how you are different. And especially at the beginning, in the early days, how we can engage with the market. And for us, it was super important to get this feedback from the clients at early days, because I believe this is the only way to develop a product. You cannot just develop your product in the basement and without the feedback from the market. So how we can engage, so lots of, of course, efforts and some lots of rejections. And we didn't need like too many yes or to have like partnerships. So I really worked very hard, was flying all over the world to find the right partners. And it's about convincing. So it's kind of like a dance. You need to understand what are the needs of the client, how you are going to solve those problems, why they need to take the chance to work with you. And after you get like the first client, it's like a domino. After that, I think it's easier to get more clients because they are not the first one that are going to kind of, they don't want to be, sorry for using this word, the suckers that using your technology first. So other one already did it, so they can do that as well.
Great, great, okay. Fascinating story, Moshiel. Jogchum, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your story.
Let's keep my story short, besides saying that it's much more interesting to talk about entrepreneurship. I spent 25 years in large corporates, both private and public corporations, seeing the inside. I had the pleasure of, the start of my career, work for a very entrepreneurial company called Cargill. And they gave a lot of freedom at a young age. And I think that really has formed my ideas around how businesses could better operate among small cells to stimulate creativity. And I think we will come back to that in a minute. What's the right environment for entrepreneurship? But so I spent 25 years looking at trading, risk management, but I was particularly working on managing large real asset portfolios like power generation parks, large power generation parks like gas-fired, coal-fired, wind, solar, and all the problems which come with those, with balancing those grid issues which come with it. But as well, developing new gas storages in salt caverns has been on the agenda there. And then I rolled into quite a unique late age in my career. I rolled into banking, where I've been managing setting a global commodities group in London. And only recently, as the last 4 or 5 years, I started focusing on private investments. Basically, I was triggered, fascinated with the revolution we went through over the last 10 years. I mean, we have seen things which would take you normally a month or 1.5 years sometimes to find things. But really, when it came to computational analytics, which we used in risk management, which we used in data analytics, in the trading risk environment, what it really has happened. I mean, you would, around 2013, if people would apply for a job in a bank, there was a real change. They typically came to quantitative groups, and we would try to recruit with a bit of quantitative background, but every one of them was Python literate. It's around 2013, 14. It was a complete digital event. And they would start challenging you, why we're doing it this way, why we're still storing this information on an archaic system. And the bank has a lot of archaic systems, troubled by working together on them. And suddenly things, we were reluctant, and this answers a bit of question about the corporate environment for where is this the right environment for creativity for startups? But these guys were challenging us, and they're saying, hey, I have this great idea, can I do this? I can model this in, and we work on it. And it's not allowed. You have to go to the quant team, then you go to the tech team, they review your investment proposal, then we will see in 6 months what we like about it. And then this guy throws his arms in the air and says, I can't work here. I says, what do you mean? He says, you need to allow me to put a server under my desk and I will build it and demonstrate it in 2 weeks. You're not allowed because the bank rules doesn't allow you to put a server under your desk. It's all city owned in this case. And but long story short, we allowed them to do so. And suddenly we saw that we could link data sets with low orbit satellite data. We were able to process data in a fraction of, from what we used to take time off. So things would take us a month to analyze could suddenly be done overnight. And it really opened my eyes. If you can do this for this industry, what would it mean for medical research? What would it do to the insurance sector, which is another archaic industry? What would it do to, in this case, I stumbled over a company which was doing molecular engineering, and they had access to the large computer capacities of Cambridge. And they were able to use computational analytics to analyze loads of different data sets. And you earlier referred to MOFs, which stands for metallic organic frameworks, but not to go too deep into it. But basically, it's a metal ion, so you can think about the whole periodic table you can use for it, and organic ligands, so you can think about other molecules you can mix up. So there are 100,000 different types of MOFs. And these guys were able to bring it down, depending on the requirements which were asked for, bring it down to a couple of alternatives, which would be there to either absorb gases or separate gases or do something with it. And normally you would have gone to the lab and tested it, and 1.5 years later you would think, maybe it doesn't work, let's go back and start again. Now you could basically do this computationally and do it in a week. And then suddenly, then you go into the lab and you have much more feedback loops, and you can computerize that as well. You can robotize it at the end. And this has been fascinating me. So I have a portfolio of investments in spin-outs of MIT and Harvard, one from Stanford. I have 2 in Cambridge. Basically a range of different investments, which all benefit from this kind of technology. Agnostic for industry, but all of them have some kind of shape, the benefit of analyzing large data sets. And there's a second interest based on my past is particularly around what it's called the decarbonization stage. I think there's a lot of focus on carbon, but there's of course the GHG gases are much broader than that, and that's actually beyond that. So there's my fascination. What can you do with it? And immaterials is a typical good example for that.
Right, right. Very interesting. Thank you very much, Jogchum. So let's turn our attention directly to the net zero challenge. Right? So this is if you follow the Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is sort of the an organization helping large corporates and other large organizations on the way to net zero, really diving deep to understand their emissions picture and to take as the first step to taking efforts to address it. The list is up to about 1,300 major organizations have signed up to science-based targets. It's growing at about 100 organizations per month. And really we're starting to see we're not quite in the level of unanimity, but we're starting to see a sort of taken for grantedness around a need for net zero innovation. But we know that even those corporates that are in the forefront of this kind of project are generating plans, doing audits, looking at their emissions picture, and they're coming up with a plan, but a plan that has a bunch of white space in it, a plan that has an uncertainty around, okay, well, this is the 75% relatively low-hanging, easy to identify fruit. We don't know what the rest is. We better go on a journey to figure it out, right? So this gives rise to the question, right? Where's that 25% going to come from? And I want to ask you what you see, in your investments, Jogchum, in your work, Moshiel, and the startups that you come into contact, other startups that you come into contact with. What's the difference between corporate innovation for net zero and startup innovation for net zero?
May I start? Is that well? Because I alluded already to it. It's effectively the creativity and the impossibilities of dreams. I think Moshiel referred to that earlier, right? He said, "Oh, everybody says that's not possible." That was one of his earliest sentences he used, and I think this is sort of describes it. Imagine you in a corporate organization, you have a brilliant idea, but the first obstacle you have, I just described in my example there, was a young kid said we could do it differently. And there was all those rules and processes and procedures and technical committees and review committees and to discuss if it would fit. And before you know, the wheel is taken away from you. And basically, computer says no, is the best description of the corporate. And I think some corporate organizations are better organized. I think if we all love to take our espressos. I mean, there's a great business case, of course, we all have used probably in school, where an espresso was purposely set outside, away from Nestle, and has managed to grow in a creative environment. I think this is another simple, this is out of the, what was it, the 90s probably, or early 2000s. And I think it best flourishes in a startup ecosystem. And however, I think the challenges we're looking at today are way too large to think that, I mean, with all respect, a couple of guys in a WeWork office could able to address these problems. I think there's a clear role for governments to stimulate this bringing all these systems together, the ecosystem, both the corporate world as the startup community. And I personally believe, but I'm a bit colored here, I believe universities play a crucial role in that. And bringing particularly difficult science challenges where computer says no or it's impossible, as Moshiel referred to, do flourish very well in bringing different knowledge centers together. Often answers in Cambridge are available, but it's quite pillared as well, quite siloed as well. It's the computer vision group working with the chemistry group. I mean, how often do they really meet? It's this bringing together, I think, which cross-fertilizes each other. And I've seen some good examples happening in Boston where MIT and Harvard work together, and they basically bring all the scientists together, combining that with Sloan Business School and effectively forcing people to come with creativity and have a free-flowing conversation. Back to what would do your question to the corporate innovation. Corporate organizations need an incentive, and that incentive can either come through either the stick or the carrot, and ultimately it's what happens on the bottom line. We need to be realistic. In 2008 or 2009, BP, Shell, all the pharmaceutical companies got rid of the till research, the till event research, the low probability things, but maybe with high outcomes, but low probability. And actually, what we've seen then, there is around 13, 14, they start giving money to the universities. Oh, can you help me research this? But effectively, it's buying a bit of guilt when it comes to the carbon challenge. It's not the way to go forward. Personally, I believe governments need to play a very important role. I think there's a good document to be found on the internet. You can find it on Breakthrough Energy Ventures. It describes the US federal policy playbook. And I think there's a couple of leads people can take from that. And basically what it says, governments need to actively bring these people together and stimulate particularly the next step. I think if we look at the UK, yes, we have a good EIS system, but when it comes to scaling, completely fail. And that's not unique to the UK, it's been everywhere. Europe tries to address it, but fails in its execution, not surprising. But I think what we really, if you want to have corporate innovation, you need to bring it together with the startup community for the creativity. And you need the government to stimulate access. So for me, it means match funding, tax credits to corporates, call it corporate EIS. EIS in the early stages, taken over by corporates and combined with the venture capital and PE environment. But you need to really guide it through to the end. I think we often let the ball drop. How often of the money, and there's a bit of a Chris challenge here, how often of the money we see in Europe being spent? The real question is, if they enter with the money, do they ever follow up to check how much the footprint reduction has been? Did they ever check how much people are actually employed? Does it meet the target? There is no feedback learning loop there. And I think that is where I think the crucial infrastructure has to be placed.
Okay. Some interesting suggestions for improvements to the ecosystem. Thank you. So Moshiel, what are your thoughts on the
I will take the
startup innovation side of things.
The startup side, and I think that the only legitimacy for startup to exist is this difference between corporate to startups. We cannot compete with corporates with funds or with access to talent or ability to build something big. The only way that we can really compete is by the fact that we need to be agile, to move fast, without like the bureaucracy that involves, as mentioned, with lots of layers of bureaucracy to get some approvals. We need to move fast and to understand that to fail, it's fine, but we need to fix it fast. So to break some walls and not to get no, it's just, a wall. We also get some no in order to break this wall and to make these changes. And I would try to be, I would say short, but the idea is to be flexible and fast.
Okay. So can you give us some ideas of what types of innovation this flexibility can achieve? that that sort of the established players find difficult to bring forward?
Yes, so there are, for instance, if you can cut some corners, and it's fine as a startup, you all need to find your shortcuts. So, for instance, if a real environment in the industry or in corporate will take you a few months' time, so you will say, okay, you are going to do the risk mitigation. I don't have like this full 8 months of development. I have only 2 months. So what I need to cut? And you need to do it like in a very smart way, of course, without doing like a major impact. It will impact, but you need to understand how you can choose your battles. What will be the trade-offs? You need to communicate and be transparent for that. Yes, we did it in 2 months' time because we didn't have enough resources, but we managed to prove one thing. Then we're going to focus on the other stuff, which will give us another advantage. And this is something that we always meeting those challenges and debate. We have like resources, how we're going to choose, how to allocate these resources, what is more important, prioritize. So this stuff, I think it's dilemmas that any startups like deal with, and you need to make the decision according to first the needs from the clients, from the customers, always to be, I would say, with the engagement, because at the end we're building a product for the market, and we don't want to get a feedback. So to understand the pains and how we are going to mitigate some challenges and problems that it will be difficult. So somebody else, in order to make them suitable or visible for them, it will take them much longer time.
Okay. So we have there's a popular belief out there that this kind of very agile entrepreneurship that you're talking about is mostly for software, but you're telling us that for example, in your space, in batteries, there's a similar advantage to being this agile team.
Yeah, so we are like, I would say, outcore other company. Of course, we have also software, but we can learn from the software industry as well. So yes, it's more complicated. The timeline to market is longer when you are developing hardware. But if you take some, I would say, some lessons from the software, that they managed to make a progress by taking the same code and just other people build and another layer on top of this code and manage to improve them. It's something that we as a startup wanted to take from day one. We wanted to understand what is existing in the industry in terms of manufacturing process, in terms of chemistry, how we can add another layer and then make them to the next generation. So similar to software, make it the next generation. And I think there are other lessons from other industries that important, like semiconductor industry. We know that there are huge fabs that build to produce silicon. If you ask me, there are better like semiconductor materials than silicon? Probably yes, but already the infrastructure is there. Also in batteries, the world invested like billions of dollars to build this infrastructure. So how we can utilize the existing production line and make another layer for the next generation of technology.
Very good, very good. And Jogchum, what lessons do you see from other the previous waves of innovation before this net zero wave that we're currently going?
There's a zillion lessons. I mean, it is fascinating if you make semiconductors or you take software, but we all going through the Moore's law. I think is an interesting aspect, which always has to be brought up in this kind of topics. But I love as well to put forward in that same context the Gardner Trough. And while people are hard aware of the Moore's law, effectively resulting in that even if the most optimistic scenarios of technology development in 2011, and I have an interesting example. I just found it today as well. I was reading it. It's like exactly 10 years ago, a very in the American Scientific American. It's published an article that said, if we really follow the Moore's law, we will have I will quickly come up the note, but effectively came down to we will if we really push it hard, we will go to 10 cents per kilowatt hour of solar panels cost. in 2021, in 2020, 10 years later. We actually had 3 cents or less than 3 cents. It's fascinating to see that even the most bullish scenario was beaten. I think there's some lessons to be learned for all industries. But now I want to go a bit back to another thing with the Gartner trough. We all basically eject creative ideas. The disappointment is there. It's this where scale up really is failing often. We see some good ideas, and then when it comes to the asset investment, the actual the pilot plant, startups stumble and tumble. Often because they either have to raise a lot of equity, and effectively the founders are being diluted to nothing, and therefore have no incentive anymore to further creative and actually jump over to another company. And it's much better to sell out to large corporate and move from there. This is what we see in a lot of industries where they get swallowed up in the end by larger industries just for the idea creation. But if you really want to go from scale up industry, call it for simplicity reasons, UK ecosystem, a company value over 25, typically the angel investor community is no longer interested. People might debate that, but I think call the bar a little bit higher. It doesn't really matter. But then there's a gap all the way to 100 and plus before the VC companies come in, and not even mentioning the PE companies. This is where the real structure is. But in that Gartner trough, right when you need to make some investments to prove your pilot plan, is precisely where the investment is the most sensitive. And I think this is where Europe, including the UK, is basically lagging first the US. There's much more willingness to really stick your neck out for the larger amounts and really get a pilot plant going. And this is why I believe the government has to play a key role in that, not through other EIS investments, but typically through British Business Bank, and have Innovate UK take as well investments opportunities both in hardware. And I think this is something where we can really learn from Germany, for example. Germany has very clear subsidy schemes to really get hardware on the ground. And so back to your question, yes, there's a lot of industries where we can take examples from, but often people like to refer to ARM. That was an asset-light model. We actually don't need an asset-light model because those assets that plant will be built in Europe, or they will be built in the US. Moshiel plant will not be in the UK. I mean, I don't want to stick my neck here out, but I bet you it will be somewhere else. And Europe will put some more money on it, some hydrogen, and it will be built in Germany, for example. I mean, it's this subsidy system which you need to bring together, bring the whole system.
Thank you. Thank you. Moshiel, what do you see as different about this climate-focused innovation, the net zero innovation? What's going to change about what's not going to be recognizable from the sort of the last 30, 40 years of internet-based innovation?
So I think in the future we will. I'm very optimistic. So I think the future will be bright, and thanks to all the innovation that many people around the world working very hard, day and night and days in order to achieve that, we will see a huge reduction in carbon emissions, and this is mainly thanks to transportation, especially in cities, which affects, of course, our daily life and health, etc. And the reason for that, we've managed to reduce the price of batteries, fuel cells dramatically, and this is going to be the reduction will be much more aggressive in the next few decades. And thanks to that, we'll be able to actually electrify our transportation, and also with energy storage ability, we can really use and rely on renewable energy. And that's the transition, when it will become not only green, because we are not in a greenwash. We need to make it more attractive to the clients. And once we'll be more attractive, and this is only going to be driven by price and cost. When you're going to buy an electric vehicle that will be much cheaper and give you like better performance, So of course you're going to buy it over your internal combustion engine. It's not going to be a question. And we need to move into this inflection point, and we are going there. It's like we are in the direction to there very soon, even sooner than we think. And we'll see more of electric vehicles on the road in the UK and all over the world very soon. And car makers, governments already announced about the transition. So there is no if it's going to happen. It's already happening in big time. So I think this would be the major part of this revolution and ability to support energy storage.
Okay, great. So I think I'm hearing you talk about the way that different systems are reinforcing these waves of these waves of innovation. Do you have any predictions for how, you talked about how changes in mobility affect our everyday lives? Any predictions that are going to be surprising to our audience here around what trends or patterns you see emerging in mobility or other aspects of city life?
I think, as I mentioned, like the adoption will be faster than we think. We see that already now. How we see like 50% of the vehicles will be electric. There is a debate when it will be exactly to happen. But with the advance of batteries, and the automotive industry choose like to move to batteries and not to other way to electrify them, we see lots of emerging technologies. Billions of dollars have been spent to create those next generation, because we really need this next generation. We're talking about silicon anode of lithium-ion battery, of solid-state batteries, all those buzzwords that around batteries. And we know like companies that trade and there's a devaluation of billions of dollars even before commercializing any product. And this is mainly thanks to Tesla, and they managed to make this shift. So batteries are sexy again thanks to Tesla. And I owe a lot of stuff in my career to Tesla, of course. And when I started to work in the batteries, it wasn't so attractive as it is today. And back then, what we saw that, yes, we need to develop new technologies. Lots of funds are pouring into this generation, but how we are going to see that, how fast, it's a big question. We don't really see that in the market. It will take some time. We need to commercialize, to scale up the technology. But what I believe that in 2030, we'll see a mass adoption of electric vehicles. So we'll already be able to build low budget passenger cars, so the public will be able to move for these vehicles.
And would you, and so is it your prediction that this mass adoption will happen and we'll all continue to drive around in private cars?
Not entirely. In big cities, I used to live in London, I didn't want to own a car. Like public transportation, of course, in some cities, it's preferable way. I prefer to walk, or if it's possible, or to cycle. I think it's the best way inside cities. But of course, we need to look on more holistic approach. Transportation is not only like electric vehicles, it's like buses, trucks, trains, even aviation and planes. And at the end, and the vision is that those big transport vehicles will be based on batteries or other sources, which were not going to produce emissions of carbon dioxide or other toxic gases. And that's, I think, one step. Another thing is to understand really how this circular economy is going to happen, how we're going to build batteries to use more environmentally friendly materials. We know that there is issues with cobalt in Congo, for instance, with child labor, or the other materials that really not going to help to this transformation. And in order to make this transition, we need to develop technologies that will be able to adapt novel chemistries to accelerate the adoption of environmental friendly material and to make them in a cost-effective and environmental friendly production process.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Thank you. Jogchum, you're on the primarily investing in the energy side of things. What do you see as disruptive coming up in the energy space?
No, I mean, pick it up from where Moshiel left it. I mean, I think the automotive industry is very attractive and very interesting. I mean, and I mean, I expected him to say fuel cells #1 and then batteries, forget it. So some of the thing to come back to. Second thing to come back to is the ESG aspect of batteries, because batteries is such a generic term and everybody throw it on it, and it's not properly. People don't think about it. You can use much better technologies, for example, which don't need volume. It's energy density per volume or per weight. Those distinctions are not made by the general public. And so therefore, and then you have the ESG aspects is immediately, so then you can use maybe redox flow batteries, which you don't need all the toxic advanced materials. You can just use iron or even go organic, which is another technology which is on the shelf at the moment and probably accelerating in the coming 10 years. So you're not using all those toxic processes, which Tesla, I mean, as a, you probably use that word 3 times because in the background says Tesla, your neighbor is probably listening now, but effectively Tesla is using a toxic battery. It's not, the general public is focused on exhaust emissions instead of looking at ESG, and there's an S and there's a G. And the social consciousness is really under attention by general public. To the governments and control in the sense of how of the supply chain is under attention. I think that will accelerate the coming 5 years, and it will definitely come back. But back to what your question was on the automotive sector, it's a fascinating thing because it's much more than a car. I mean, if you want to talk about what is going to be in the future, it's your localized smart grid. It is an infrastructure which releases power when it needs to, and it's your microgrid solution in your local neighborhood. And I think ultimately that's where we're going to. You already see it at Tesla. There you go again. That's £50 from me now, which you're getting. Is they are handing out these free battery stations if you buy a car. If you in local areas where there's not enough coverage, they do that as they build a grid, and as much as they're offering services. That's just general grid, but not microgrid. So I think automotive is indeed a fantastic thing which comes around the corner. But I think real breakthrough, it's much more around energy storage, improvements about using different materials, more organic materials, or much more less toxic. As I referred to Tesla, yes, it ships at first. Although they reduced it on battery day from 4 times going up and down, I think it's now 2 times up and down to China before it gets into battery, but still it's a problem. And I think this is, I think where fuel cells will play a role. I think the debate, I love to hear Moshiel as well about this thing. People think it's batteries versus fuel cells. People forget actually a fuel cell needs a battery. And I think this lack of knowledge is all over the place. And a battery is not a battery when you're talking about the energy grid requirements for 8-hour storage or 4-hour storage. There are much cheaper solutions everywhere. And I think this is fascinating me, how you map that kind of route and which are the much more economical solutions for a problem or a challenge. So you just don't throw a Tesla battery at a 8-hour grid problem outage problem. Or actually, because the decay of a Tesla battery is well known. I mean, you can't run it short to 0. It's you flip around 80 and every time it's worse. So there are different technologies which are much better, and to that sense. So it's fascinating to see where we're going, but ultimately we will have to address the greenwashing, and the greenwashing is prevalent everywhere, and it's and I think it comes down therefore the real breakthrough is a proper administrative system. I'm a big fan of super governmental organizations to really manage that kind of infrastructure, blockchain, if you want to matter. It doesn't have to be distributed, but I believe a system where you can transfer from one to the other in a really closed system, I think is absolutely a must. I mean, the UNFCCC, which is based in Bonn, did a good effort in the early 2000s. It was around clean development mechanisms. So this was about carbon credits you could swap around. Only we didn't have the supervision powers, policing powers. And now with satellite data, we are. I mean, look about people complaining about methane leakage. It instantly can be spotted with satellites. That's why Biton referred to infrastructure, everything satellites. People are like, what is satellites to do? It's about supervision and policing. And I think in ships, supervision, all that things is a crucial part of it. So I believe, I mean, it looks like I'm a complete governmental push here today, but I do believe it's, yeah, if you start flowing those billions and trillions, let's be smart about it and bringing the right people together to make it move.
So I suppose the commentary that I follow suggests that we that in some ways this this climate change wave of innovation is like mobilizing for a war. Right? That the public is turning to the government to say do something about climate change, and like a lot of sustainability priorities, it's both wealthy people and poor people turning to the government to ask them to do something about climate change. And so the government is turning to the private sector and saying, okay, private sector, do something, right? You know, get on with it and make this change happen.
I would, sorry for the because I think it's what is interesting there. That's two stakeholders, and I think universities could play a very key role in there, and the startup community around universities. I think people forget that key stakeholder. It harnesses the creativity, it harnesses knowledge, and I think the ability to really be selective there, I think, is a crucial part. And you can throw all those billions, but if you expect people to solve it. I mean, I have an example in Cambridge. There is no lab capacity for startups. Oh, it's not solved by giving money to British Business Bank or give money to Innovate UK. It is this what needs to be. If you offer free lab space, for example, if I give you 50 lab benches to Chris, and Chris is going to be able to select which startups would be best to contribute to the following goals, and I ask Chris as well to monitor the outcome of it, what it would be, then I have an infrastructure which is supervised. It is very clear. It comes really clear where it has to, the money arrives where it has to arrive, and then you will ask match funding from the next phase from the government, from corporates. Now we happen to have, and it's a bit my own background, of course, finance, but we give the money to a bunch of venture capitalists and PE companies, and then try to get match funding going. I'm not sure if that's the right solution. There are a lot of parasites in London who just live off the ecosystem, and the money never really arrives to the really interested investee companies who needs to have it. And I think for me, I sound very cynical, and I'd like to be the optimist with Moshiel as well. And I believe technology I can be optimistic about, but I'm worried about sometimes how people basically brush off the greenwashing. They're buying off their guilt by saying, look, I planted a bunch of trees and now I'm green. It's not the answer, because those trees if they don't get policed, then they get cut. Anyway, so that's
Thank you, Jogchum. Moshiel, I think you're in a position to comment on this idea that universities are potential additional sort of point of leverage here. Do you see some untapped potential there, or is the market already pulling, as they did you, into appropriate innovation projects?
So I think universities are a great incubator of ideas. For sure, you need the knowledge, you need the background, you need the freedom to research in order to find this type of solution. I wasn't able to start with the company without my team, without the knowledge that we gain, thanks to also, of course, all the years in the academia. So it's a good incubator, but if you really want to build a business, I think there is no half pregnancy. You need to choose where you're going to do it and how you're going to do it. You cannot just, it's very rare that you can be successful doing several things simultaneously. You need to focus. And in order to focus, you need to have like not 100% of your time, like 200% of your time dedicate to your vision and to your goal. And it's very binary. If you're doing something that is not related to your like vision and day job in your startup, and it's going to drag you to other stuff, the risk is high and the chances are low. So I will not recommend to anyone in academia to do it at the same time that is like a student or conducting research, or it should be separated. But of course, universities are a great place to incubate the ideas, to give the support, the kick for generating those like startups.
But it's
what do you think, Chris? You have carbon 13, isn't it? So you
well,
can
I do
you have the best
13.
insight. There
Yeah.
you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think of carbon 13 as if you're familiar with the UK education system, you might get the metaphor as the grammar school model, because we draw on about 30% of our talent in carbon 13 coming from within basically Oxbridge, the Oxbridge ecosystem, and a few other key sources of talent around the university system. But we're bringing talented people, with the right technical backgrounds and with the right commercial backgrounds to sort of get the scientists and get the engineers who might otherwise take many years to sort of find the right path to get on a commercial path more quickly, right? Given what we're doing in the climate, given the urgency of the climate emergency, right? Given that we have to go beyond what's already started with the renewables rollout and with electric vehicles and so on. We need these new trajectories of innovation to get started immediately. And maybe that requires, and this is to your point, Jogchum, maybe this requires universities to rethink their role and push it a little bit further past the incubator stage, right? Because Moshiel's point is exactly right, that the incentive structure within academia doesn't lead to commercialize this project. Maybe in the sort of worldwide emergency that we're facing, there has to be some kind of new hybrid structures, and I guess carbon 13 is sort of supposed to be that, to try to extract the promising ideas more with less waste, with more certainty,
yeah, I think
bring
also
this together more efficiently.
Yeah, one thing that we see the change, like traditionally in academia, also a lot of toxicity, I would say, and poison and ego between like academics and the members in the universities led to prevent this innovation and idea and lots of also ownership of the university. And the models, and I think the UK is doing really great in the past recent years, is to learn what the US universities did and to give the freedom to academics, to researchers, to students to come with their ideas and to develop them, and to give them also the opportunity to work on their, because you can be a researcher and a brilliant entrepreneur at the same time, and then you can choose later on. But if the university is very difficult with you and not give you the ability to come with your ideas, so it's kind of like a killer for your ideas. So this level is starting to change. I think Israel is in the middle, more advanced than the UK in terms of them, but the US is really a good role model. And if UK university will take this path, and in the several years, they are doing really well, but this is the way to move and to build really good entrepreneurs from academia to the outside world.
I mean, I actually really, from having an ability to compare, I really like the Cambridge environment actually. It's quite liberating versus some other universities here in the UK. And I mean, it's probably the life science environment around it as well, which really contributes, although I'm worried that the life science entrepreneurship is one-way street. What I like in the US is that actually people go into life science industry and come back. This nice thing about the whole Boston environment, people take a couple of years as a researcher, you go a couple of years work for AstraZeneca, and then you go back into entrepreneurship or back into university.
Yeah.
Once you leave Cambridge, it's a bit, if you leave the university, then you left. You're not going to come back. And it's like, oh, all right, why is that?
Well, I mean, and this is to Moshiel's point. I think, and what you're saying about governments and what Moshiel's saying about the sort of the clear boundary between academic life and innovation life. Maybe some of these boundaries have to be relooked at in order, as part of this overarching challenge for addressing the climate emergency. Okay, well,
although they are badly, I think the answer is maybe I already think about people say, yeah, but I'm badly paid at the university than going to AstraZeneca. I mean, it's true, of course, that they are. It's difficult as an entrepreneur. It's difficult as a researcher. You get better paid. I think there is a role here as well, creating an ecosystem where university and corporate are playing a role into making sure that founders as well keep maintaining enough equity and not try to raise money and then actually already have a poor salary and then losing equity makes no sense. So this is sort of the infrastructure you want to have collaborations around.
Fascinating. Thank you so much. Okay, well, that brings us to the close of our of it just being the three of us, and I really welcome some questions at this point from our audience, and the Q&A box is there for questions. Please fire away.
Always surprising. It's always the challenge what we had.
Well, when you become a lecturer, one of the things that they teach you is to be very quiet, and if you don't say anything, then eventually someone will raise their hand. So I'll be very quiet for a moment and see if it works in this context. Okay, we have someone who's raised their hand. I think you can type your question in the Q&A in the Q&A box. Oh, it seems that I'm the one who's raised my hand. I didn't mean to do that. No.
I did see a rant from Adam Durant. So yeah.
Thank you, Adam. So Adam's got a very on-point question. There's a fundamental idea in sustainability, which is about consuming less. We touched on it with circularity, reducing exploitation to a minimum. How can that fit in with the world of investment? Investment usually means growth, right? And entrepreneurship, exploiting opportunities. So how do we, any thoughts, colleagues, on how we reconcile these two together?
I immediately say carbon negative. That's the first word which comes up if I see this question. I mean, there's several projects out there, both large corporates actually, who are trying to, for example, carbon negative cement, for example, as an example. But finding solutions, what you do with the carbon, instead of try to get it subsidized and put it under the ground for 150 pounds a ton, doesn't sound like the right idea. Right? Can you do something else with it? Is an interesting challenge. And if you find that, then I can call it carbon negative. I think that's where sustainability and investments come together. I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the way to look on that is from like the economic value. So let's not talk about like environment. Let's not talk about performance improvement. Let's see how it's going to contribute to economic value. And if it makes sense to investors and they're going to get returns and it's going to be profitable for them. So that's actually what is going to move the needle at the end. If you want to get like a private investment or equity investment, not like a government fund. With government, it's a bit different, but it can actually give you the bridge before you make this thesis that you can actually make the economic value. So finance is the key to look from like cost perspective. It's the way to move forward with investment.
Thank you, Moshiel. So I think those are both really valuable perspectives. There's something here about the way that economies are going to have to dematerialize, right? That we've got some basic ideas of owning stuff, shipping stuff around, spending our time acquiring stuff that are going to become old-fashioned, right? And new sources of economic value that are around experiences and dematerialized ways of having a great life are going to have to come to the fore. There's one school of thought that suggests that the climate emergency will become so severe that the dream of environmentalists since the 1960s that consumption patterns will change across wealthy countries to match. Personally, I'm quite dubious. Right? I think it's about bringing value to customers in a way where the trade-offs that they experience from less materiality, less less consumption in that sense, become very palatable because they're bundled together with other sources of economic value. So Adam, it's a very it's a question that's really at the heart of this. So thank you for asking this. So Neil is asking something that I think is going to be close to Jogchum's heart. To what extent do you think entrepreneurship would benefit from subsidy reform and a better situation around economic rents? So here in Cambridge, exactly this desirability that you talked about, Jogchum, means that rents are high, right? So pilot facilities get a bit expensive, despite the presence of the amazing talent pool. Any instant thoughts on that? Well, Jogchum, because I know you're on a government push tonight. But from either of you.
People wouldn't recognize me if I say this, but it's much more that I believe something is fundamentally wrong. We have opportunity to address it. But here, I think I have only one simple answer. This is, if you have to look at the wider university ecosystem. I mean, all the land around Cambridge actually is university owned. People don't realize that. I mean, I have a farmer friend who actually sold out all his farmland just now to one of the colleges.
Yeah.
And guess what? On that farmland, there were multiple buildings where there are small startups building plants. And in one of those companies I'm invested in, it's called Taste Flavorings, if you want to look it up. That land, including the buildings, got bought by the university. So actually involving the university in the wider context, in the wider ecosystem, I think is crucial. And I think they flushed with money, and wouldn't be a brilliant idea to bring as a university, or Chris, maybe something for you, to bring all those treasurers of those large colleges and wealthy colleges together in return for a small equity stake or upside in the form of warrants to offer their land and make space available. I think that's the intriguing thing. I think we're coming to the university as a central roundabout of success.
So there's something in there about changing the incentive structures for these hundreds-year-old organizations, which is an interesting challenge. Now I want to pick up Jonas' comment, which is actually in the chat rather than in the Q&A, which is about this theme of disruptive entrepreneurship, and I think it's a very healthy discipline that Jonas is applying to us, which is to say, okay, the topic for the evening is disruptive innovation, and we spent quite some time talking about some of the existing trajectories that are going on around, particularly around mobility and electric vehicles. And so Jonas says, if we think about disruption as displacing incumbents, right? So is Tesla an incumbent? I guess Tesla by now is an incumbent. If we think about disruption as displacing incumbents and legacy industries, is that kind of new industry arising going to be achievable? Any thoughts from my esteemed colleagues here? Okay.
I can answer. Thanks for bringing it back to disruptive. It's a bit of entrepreneurship. I mean, I think what I earlier referred to, a lot of the corporate organizations are incapable of really offering the creative environment to be disruptive, and because there's not nature to their how they're organized. So yes, we need disruptive entrepreneurship to really challenge incumbents.
I can certainly vouch for that. Thank you very much for the question.